a matter of time before Eric would seriously harm someone else.
How could anybody do such a terrible, terrible thing?
After this, Eric did disgusting and horrifying things to Derek's body. Children are usually some of the most pure and innocent beings on the planet. They are still learning good from bad. It's hard to imagine that a child could truly be evil, much less capable of taking someone's life. But that is what happened with these 3 cases. The following stories tell the tale of 3 twisted children who actually killed people. We have a tiny redhead bullied into becoming a terror, and a deranged teen willing to use his brute strength to harm the most innocent. And finally, we have the youngest serial killer of all time. This is the story of Eric Smith, who was 13 years old at the time that he committed this crime. As you can see, he looks pretty harmless with his red hair, glasses, and freckles. Eric was born in 1980 in New York. He didn't have the easiest of times growing up, due largely in part to the fact that he had a speech impediment. This was something that other kids would bully him for. He lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone. There was basically no crime, and it was known for being the perfect place to raise kids in. Eric's parents didn't have the best relationship. His mother, Tammy, argued with his father a lot, and eventually his father ended up moving out of the home, leaving Tammy to raise the children alone. Eventually, he would return for a brief time, and Tammy would get pregnant again, but he ultimately would leave once again. He never really had much of a role in Eric's life. Sadly, Eric's little sister would come to know his father a lot more than he ever would. His father would pick up his little sister and take her to do fun things around town, but would essentially ignore Eric, which hurt him badly. Eric's mother, Tammy, was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was a girl and was prescribed medication for it. She continued to take this medication even through adulthood and while she was pregnant with Eric. She also took an antidepressant when she was pregnant with him. At the time, there wasn't a lot of information about what medications are safe for pregnancy and which aren't. So she wasn't aware of any sort of side effects these medications may have had on Eric's development. It wouldn't be until years later that it would be determined that her epilepsy medication actually could harm her unborn child. Eric had a tough time in school. He would get frustrated very easily and have outbursts. But at the time, his teachers didn't really think his behavior was that unusual for other kids his age. After all, kids are still learning how to moderate their tempers. Eric also didn't get along well with the other kids, not only for how he talked, but because of how he looked. He was definitely a loner. Eventually, Eric's mom would get remarried to a guy named Ted. Ted essentially adopted Eric and raised him as his own. Ted was quick to notice that Eric had some behavioral issues and he was not about to put up with them. He was quick to punish him, sometimes severely. Even though Eric had trouble in school, he was still really well liked by some of his neighbors who said he was unlike other little boys his age. They said he would go out of his way to do nice things for them, whether it was mowing the lawn or helping them with the dishes. He also got along very well with his grandparents, Red and Eddie Wilson. Spending time with his grandparents was one of his favorite things to do. He loved them very much and was always showing them affection. He loved getting to go to their house and getting away from everything that was going on at home. Eric's school problems were getting pretty serious. He had been held back 2 years in a row, so while he was technically in the 5th grade, he was 13 years old. His life was going downhill quickly. His anger problems were even getting worse, and he would lash out at the kids at school, sometimes kicking, hitting, and screaming. At one point, he even set his own kitchen on fire. It was as if he was filled with rage and had no way of releasing it. The bullying was also getting worse and worse. Kids would absolutely terrorize him. Eric's sister would later say that there was one incident that occurred on the bus where some kids took Eric's backpack from him, opened, and shook out all the contents onto the floor. They then forced him to pick it all back up while everyone watched and made fun of him. The bullying was constant. People would hit him, break his glasses, slap his face, and hurt him in any way imaginable. His days were brutal from start to finish. By the time he got home from school, he would be angry and depressed. What friends Eric did have, he would end up losing. One kid who was the same age as Eric had a sleepover with him one night. This kid would wake up in the middle of the night to a red, hot pain. When he opened his eyes, he would find Eric standing over him, burning his nose with a cigarette. It was clear that it was only a matter of time before Eric would seriously harm someone else. He liked preying on those more vulnerable than him, including animals. Eric's life would change forever on August 2nd of 1993. There was a sweet little boy named Derek Robbie who was only 4 years old. He was absolutely adorable with blonde hair and blue eyes. He was an adventurous and funny child and was beloved by his parents, Dale and Doreen. Derek was the oldest child and he absolutely adored his little brother, who he would shower with hugs and kisses. On the summer that this all went down, Derek was attending a summer day camp. On one particular day, Derek's baby brother was extra fussy, and Derek told his mother that he would be okay getting to the day camp on his own. His mom had never let him go alone before, but she was tired and stressed, and probably thought that since this was such a small, safe town, he would be okay, so she agreed. This would be a decision that she would regret for the rest of her life. Feeling excited and independent, little Derek left home and began making his way to the camp. While he was walking, Eric happened to pass by while on his bike. Eric had been at the same camp that Derek was on his way towards, but was kicked out due to bad behavior. He was angry and looking for someone to take his rage out on. That's when he saw adorable little Derek walking alone and completely defenseless. Eric started to talk to Derek, basically pretending to be his friend. After some convincing, he talked Derek into following him into the woods to play. Derek, somewhat impressionable and probably eager to play with an older kid, went willingly with Eric into the woods, thinking he was in for a good time. Unfortunately, he would never come out of the woods alive. Once Eric got Derek into the woods, he strangled the little boy to death. As if that was not enough, he then grabbed a giant 25-pound rock and dropped it on the child's head. After this, Eric did disgusting and horrifying things to Derek's body, including mutilating him. He opened up the little boy's lunch bag and used the items inside to even further dehumanize the child, including sprinkling a Kool-Aid packet into his cuts. Back at home, Derek's mother, Doreen, was having a motherly instinct moment. She had this feeling deep in her gut that she shouldn't have let her little boy leave on his own. She decided she needed to go out and make sure that her son made it to camp. When she got there, she was informed that he never arrived. Now, in a panic, Doreen called the police. Just like that, a massive investigation began in the community. Everyone in town knew Derek and his family, so this was personal to them. Everyone came out to search for the little boy. Even Eric pretended to search. Unfortunately, Derek's body would later be found in the woods, and the entire town was turned upside down. Because Eric had admitted to someone that he saw Derek around the time that he was thought to go missing, police believed that he could know a little bit more than he was letting on. But they certainly didn't think that he did anything to Derek. They believed they were looking for an adult. The whole town was rattled by what happened to Derek, including Eric's own family.
Everybody, including myself, thought it was an adult. And how could anybody do such a terrible, terrible thing?
Everyone knew that there was a possibility that the person who killed Derek was someone that they all knew, that was just existing in the community. Could it be someone they passed in the grocery store? Or just walking down the street? Meanwhile, Eric's mother, Tammy, is also having a motherly instinct moment. For some reason, she just had a hunch that Eric knew more than he was letting on about Derek's murder. She didn't think that he did it, but she did think that he had seen who did it and was just too afraid to say anything. So a couple of days went by and she ended up confronting her son about it. What he said to her was the last thing she could have ever expected, and it would change her life forever. Eric turned to her, looked her dead in the eyes, and said, "I did it." Tammy had a full-on meltdown. She began screaming and crying and asking Eric why he would do such a thing. He started crying and just kept saying, "I don't know, I don't know." Eventually, Tammy took her own son down to the station, where he was arrested.
I was there when my grandson confessed. And it was terrible.
Eric's grandpa tried to make sense of what he had done.
I asked him why he did it. His words, almost verbatim, were, "I don't know. I just saw this kid, this blonde kid, and I wanted to hurt him."
As an adult, Eric looked back and reflected upon what he did and seemed to be disgusted with himself.
I got him by himself and I strangled him. I hit him over the head with a rock numerous times and poured Kool-Aid on him. And I became the bully that I hated in school. I became the individual who dished out pain. They thought that I knew who did it or I'd seen who had done it. But the person they were looking for is me. I couldn't hold it in anymore.
When police announced that they had the killer and they had confessed, the media was swarming everywhere to try to get a glance of whoever this sick man was. A tiny redhead boy with freckles and glasses wearing a bright yellow shirt was probably the last thing that they expected. The entire nation was shocked. Nobody could understand how anybody, much less a child, could actually do something like this. The case went to trial, and the defense tried to say that the epilepsy medication that Eric's mom had been taking while pregnant with him and the intense bullying he experienced played into why he did what he did. But the jury didn't buy it. They were particularly struck by something Eric had said in his confession. He did what he did because he saw someone weaker than him and wanted to hurt him. He liked the fact that Derek was defenseless. It was unbelievable that a child could have such a twisted and deranged desire. Ultimately, Eric was found guilty.
So you find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree?
Yes.
Is that unanimous?
Yes.
Sobbing can be heard in the courtroom as the verdict is read, but young Eric keeps a straight face. He was sentenced to 9 years to life in prison. Derek's parents were, of course, devastated and confused by the sentence. They didn't believe that Eric should ever be released from prison, especially after only 9 years. But the court believed that because Eric was so young, that he could change and become a better person. So Eric gets to prison, and every 2 years he has a parole hearing. And every 2 years, Derek's grieving family has to come forward and try to convince the court not to release Eric. He was denied parole 10 times in a row. After spending 28 years behind bars, Eric was granted parole at the age of 43. He was ultimately released on February 1st of 2022. His release was a hard pill to swallow for Derek's parents, still grieving the loss of their little boy.
I understand why, after so many years, they decided to give him a chance. And that's fine, you know, for him and his family.
Derek's parents spent so many years trying to keep Eric in jail for killing their son. That journey is now over.
You know, he's been released, but in a way, so have we. No more parole. I can get on with our lives. Now the true healing can begin.
As part of the healing process, Derek's parents do their best to only focus on the happy, positive memories that they have with their son and their friends and family who help them to keep Derek's memory alive.
August 2nd, the day we lost him, we always try to go do something fun. White ice cream with sprinkles. That's what Derek called vanilla. So we try to do
Wherever we are, we have to go we have to go find ice cream.
even though it's sad, it's happy.
It's hard to imagine spending almost all your teen years, as well as the rest of your life, in prison. You would miss out on so much in life. You're taken away from your family and friends. You'll never drive a car, go to prom, get a job, or get a chance to get married and start a family of your own. You'll essentially have lost your entire future. If you break the law, you must face the consequences. And that was true for a boy named Lionel Tate. Lionel's freedom and life as he knew it ended when he was just 14 years old in 2001. He became the youngest person to ever get sentenced to life in prison. While this punishment might seem extremely harsh, because of what he did, it was definitely deserved. Lionel's horrific crime took place on July 28th of 1999 in an area of Florida called Pembroke Park. Lionel was at home and his mother Kathleen was in the kitchen making a meal for him and a child she was babysitting. The child was a 6-year-old little girl named Tiffany Unick. Tiffany was the daughter of one of Kathleen's best friends, and her mother had asked if Kathleen could watch her for the evening. Kathleen and Tiffany's mother were like family and had grown up together in Jamaica before coming over to the United States. Deweese, Tiffany's mom, was completely comfortable leaving her daughter in Kathleen's hands. After Kathleen finished cooking and the three of them ate dinner, she was feeling pretty tired, so she decided to go up to bed. She left Lionel and Tiffany downstairs watching television. Later that night, Kathleen heard some noise coming from the downstairs, and she figured the kids were just playing around, so she shouted down for them to quiet down. Not going downstairs to investigate what was really going on would be something that Kathleen would regret for the rest of her life. Not long after Kathleen had heard the noise from downstairs, Lionel came into her room and woke her up. He told her that he and Tiffany had been playing wrestling when all of a sudden she stopped breathing. Kathleen is of course panicked and in a state of disbelief. The story that Lionel would later tell was that he and Tiffany had been watching a wrestling show on television and decided to try out some of the professional moves. It was when he had put Tiffany into a headlock that she hit her head on the side of the table. The thought of Tiffany and Lionel even wrestling by itself is concerning due to the huge weight difference between the two of them. Tiffany was only 48 pounds when Lionel weighed close to 170. He would easily be able to overpower her. Lionel told his mother that after Tiffany hit her head, that she was sobbing uncontrollably. He didn't want to mess with her, so he just continued watching television. By the time he had suspected something was wrong and went to get his mother, Tiffany had already died. Of course, there were so many questions associated with this case. Did Lionel not know that the wrestling moves he was doing were dangerous? Did he not consider how much bigger he was than Tiffany? Had he meant to hurt her, or was this all a tragic accident? As investigators begin to look into Tiffany's manner of death, they are shocked to see how horrifically her body was injured. It looked as if she had been hit by a car and clearly suffered tremendously prior to her death. She had been beaten barbarically and had a cracked skull, broken rib, swollen brain, and a sliced liver, and was completely covered in bruises. It was believed that her beating had lasted for several minutes before her death. This was clearly no accident. You see, Lionel had a history with violence and aggression. He was a known bully at school and had been suspended countless times. It wasn't just that he didn't get along with other kids, he would also engage in criminal behavior and was even caught stealing. This was, of course, a bad reflection on Kathleen. Ultimately, Lionel would be arrested for Tiffany's murder and faced trial in 2011. The trial was obviously horrific as the killer was so young and Tiffany had just been a defenseless child. One of the most disturbing aspects of the trial was when a video was shown to the court of Lionel reenacting what he did to Tiffany to a therapist. Tiffany's mom couldn't help but break down in tears when she watched it. The defense tried to tell the court that Lionel was struggling with a wrestling addiction, but the prosecution didn't buy it. I'm concerned that if the wrestling defense is allowed, this trial won't be about defendant Lionel Tate's actions. Ken was also very concerned that Lionel's defense was trying to say that Lionel had mental health issues, as if that somehow excused what he did. They also tried to say that Lionel didn't kill Tiffany, he just beat her, and it was injuries that she died of, as crazy as it sounds. A psychiatrist on the defense team claimed that Lionel had become obsessed with wrestling because of how many Hollywood movies there were at the time depicting wrestlers as cool and powerful. He also claimed that Lionel simply never considered the fact that he was so much bigger than his opponent. They even said that Lionel was not emotionally mature yet and had no idea that he had been hurting Tiffany. Based upon just how severe the little girl's injuries were, this was pretty hard to believe. But the courts did end up making an IQ test on Lionel and found out that his IQ was strangely very below average. Was it possible that he was so unintelligent and unaware that he truly didn't think what he was doing would harm Tiffany? Lionel claimed that when he initially realized that Tiffany was hurt, he went to get some ice for her head. But when he got back, she ran to the bathroom to throw up. This is a likely sign that she was already suffering from a concussion. He also heard her making strange noises, like she was struggling, but he just thought that she was being dramatic or messing with him, so he failed to call for help right away. When Lionel first told his mother about Tiffany's condition that fateful night, Kathleen rushed downstairs as fast as she could and tried to administer CPR, but it was too late, and the little girl would soon be pronounced dead at the hospital. Lionel told his legal team that he liked Tiffany and had no reason to hurt her. They believed him, but the prosecution team certainly did not. There had to be malice involved for Tiffany to have been beaten so horrifically. If Lionel didn't already look totally guilty, the fact that he frequently changed up the details of his story of what happened that night made his case look even worse. Desperate to bring him down, the prosecution ended up coming up with a plea deal that they offered him. They wanted him to admit that he knew his actions could lead to Tiffany's death, but that he didn't intend to kill her. The charge would be second-degree homicide, and he would only spend around 3 years in prison. Considering the type of situation that Lionel was in and the possibility of him actually spending the rest of his life in jail, this deal must have looked pretty sweet. But strangely enough, Lionel's mother and the prosecution team urged Lionel not to take it. They thought that they could still prove Lionel's innocence. Kathleen stood by her son and said that what happened was simply no more than an accident. This must have felt like the biggest betrayal to Tiffany's mother, Kathleen's former best friend. Lionel's trial shocked the entire nation, and everyone waited in anticipation to find out what the jury was going to decide. The jury didn't come up with a conclusion right away. They actually ended up deliberating for 2 full weeks before finally finding Lionel guilty of first-degree murder. He would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He could be seen wiping away tears as he was then taken away to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Despite what horrific things that Lionel did to poor, innocent little Tiffany, people actually believed that he deserved the second chance. And shockingly, he got one. He had only been in jail for 3 years when his case was revisited in 2003. His defense team ended up having him take the old plea deal instead of pleading guilty to the second-degree homicide. This would result in him spending no more than 4 years in prison. Because he had already served 3 years, he was able to get released and spend only a year on house arrest. Lionel got a taste at freedom, but not completely. He would have to wear an ankle bracelet and would be on probation. It didn't take him long to get in trouble once again when he was found with a knife. Due to the terms of probation, he wasn't allowed weapons like this. His probation was extended from 10 years to 15. He was also told that if he messed up again, he would be back in prison. Lionel's freedom was not long lasting, and he got in trouble yet again in 2005. He was charged with burglary with battery and was even found to have been in possession of a firearm, a very serious violation of his parole. This time the judge wouldn't take it easy on him and told him, "Lionel Tate, you are out of second chances." Lionel was then sentenced to 10 years in prison for the burglary and battery, to be served alongside with 30 more years for violating his probation. Today, Lionel is 35 years old and he remains behind bars. It's hard to imagine a child killing someone, and even harder to imagine a child killing at just 7 or 8 years old. But that's the case in this story. This case is set in a small village in India called Mashari. The year was 2006. This is a very poor village where most people were just barely scraping by and managing to keep food on the table for them and their families. The children of the village would play outside in the streets with their friends and extended family members. One of the families that lived in this village was the Sada family. One day, a member of the Sada family, a little 6-year-old girl, went missing. While those that lived in the village were less likely to allow their children to play outside, they didn't really pry that much into what happened to that little girl due to not wanting to offend them while they were in their state of grief. As if this wasn't strange enough, it wasn't long before another child would be born into the Sada family, only for the infant to also go missing. At this point, the village people are thinking that something strange is going on, but they keep it to themselves. By 2007, yet another child had gone missing, but this one was not from the Sada family. It was a 6-month-old baby that had been dropped off by her mother at a local primary school. Even though the child had been supposedly supervised the whole time, someone had managed to sneak out with her. At this point, the police are called and they quickly arrive to the village to investigate. They are approached by a tiny 8-year-old boy who's very excited to tell them that he knows what happened to the baby because he killed her. This little boy was Amardeep Sada. At first, the police think that this is just a child with a big imagination, but the more they talk to him, the more they are convinced that the child could actually be a killer. He even ends up leading them to where they find the missing child's dead body. They take Amardeep down to the police station for further questioning. The police were disturbed to see that the child had a huge smile on his face while he described how he had horrifically killed a child. It was as if he didn't know or understand that he had done anything wrong. He was clearly very deranged. She was sleeping in the school. I took her a little away and killed her with a stone and buried her, he told them at one point. Amardeep was from a poor family, and his father did difficult physical labor to provide for his children. Even though they were barely getting by, his mother still wanted and planned to have more children. This child was known for being bad, and even often terrorizing the other kids in the village. As it would turn out, Amardeep's parents actually knew that he had committed murder twice before, and knew who the victims were as they were a part of his own family. While they claimed to have punished their child for what he did, they didn't end up reporting his crimes and ultimately protected him from going to jail. They considered it a family secret. By the time that Amardeep was killed for a third time, they could no longer keep it a secret, as this infant was not a member of their family. It was hard for police to try to piece together how Amardeep could have done these terrible things. For one thing, he never had any motive, nor did he ever watch a television show or get exposed to any media that would have taught him to kill. He was clearly just mentally off. Due to the law of India, a child as young as Amardeep could not be sentenced to death or prison. They can, however, be detained until they are 18 years old. Amardeep was released upon the day of his 18th birthday. Despite the horrible crimes that he committed. He's now in his 20s. Were these sentences fair, or would you have wished they were different? Let us know in the comments.